The next call was a split call. Dr. Kennedy Graham, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't want to interrupt the previous speaker in full flight, but we do want you to know, sir, that the Green Party does not think that you have a small and narrow-minded perspective. And moving on from the faintly simplistic tub-thumping of a left-right nature that we've just heard, and focusing on the point that we're meant to be here for, which is to look at the bill that is before us and the committee's report back on the bill, which didn't actually figure explicitly for a second in the previous presentation. We find that the purpose of the bill is to make legislative changes to align New Zealand's laws and regulations with its obligations under the international agreement, which New Zealand signed in February this year. But why? In order to enable New Zealand to ratify the agreement. Now, let me pick up where my colleague Barry Coates left off, which is to indicate that there is actually no need at all, right at this moment, for New Zealand to proceed to ratify at this stage. We should defer any further consideration of this legislation until the international politics of the matter become clearer, for very obvious reasons. Harking back to the beginning of this debate and the quite substantive contributions made by the first two speakers in the form of the Honourable Chris Finlayson, somewhat vaguely, perhaps on behalf of the Minister of Trade, but nonetheless well meant, and the following contribution from Mark Mitchell, I identified 4 substantive issues that were made somewhat vaguely. Mr. Finlayson assured an unwitting House that a free trade agreement, of course, this is not, would promote trade between New Zealand and other countries. On the basis of that reassurance, he proceeded to tell us that we had no need for worries about any changes to Farm Act legislation, no need to worry about changes to copyright, and that we should glory in the impetus that the changes to these 10 bills is going to give to the Maori economy with 5.6% of GDP. And that prompted him to assure the country that the series of consultations the government had were entirely comprehensive. The road shows, they tried, I think, for a better word. They could have used a better word, but they couldn't. So they're called the road shows. And the series of hui were good for the Maori economy. And that led on to Mark Mitchell claiming, erroneously, that there is a majority of opinion in this House in favour of the TPPA. He based that on, he reasoned his way along a tortuous path of self-delusion to the view that there was majority support on the grounds that there were quite a few submitters turning up to actually support the bill. Yes, there were. That's true. There was an overwhelming greater majority opposing the bill, but there were some who did turn up to support the bill, granted. But that is not the point when it comes to civic engagement and integrity vis-à-vis the New Zealand public. The critical thing is what the public generally out there, each individual citizen, not a corporation, which carries weight and influence, but the individual citizen. And as Barry Coates pointed out, there was one poll that said of those who were familiar with a major poll, and the one that concentrated on the fact that those who were familiar with the TPPA, 60% opposed. Beyond that, I commissioned the Parliamentary Library to do an objective study of all the polls pertaining to TPPA to find that, on average, the public opinion polls of the polls show that 39% opposed the TPP and 26% supported it, with a sizable area in the don't know category. So we conclude that, on balance, a majority of the New Zealand citizens opposed the agreement. a plurality of 3 to 2 against the agreement does raise the question whether this government's claimed electoral mandate for this kind of treaty is legitimate or whether it requires a specific endorsement.
Time has expired.